a presentation from Dr. Richard Munang, who will talk about bridging gaps for climate action in Africa, looking specifically at making youth leadership in solutions a reality. So thank you, Kasim, and I'll welcome Dr. Richard Munang to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Fatu, and thanks to all those who are joining in from all corners of the world, and to the executive director and everyone present, all protocols observed. It is a great honor for me to be with you here today. And without much ado, let me start off with this African proverb, which tells us that you cannot build a house for last year's summer. This African proverb expresses the moment we are in today. And the message is clear. Climate action cannot be postponed any longer. About 30 days ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published the 2021 Physical Science Basis Report, aptly called A Good Rate for Humanity. The core finding of this analysis showed that the world is likely to breach the set 1.5 degrees warming threshold in just 2 decades. For every 1 degree of warming, extreme daily precipitation events will intensify by 7%. We are already on this slippery slope. But what does this mean for Africa? A region that is already heating up twice as fast as the rest of the globe. This means that the safe threshold of 1.5 degrees will likely be breached much earlier than any other region and will escalate risk severity in the African continent, whether it is the worst drought in 40 years that we are seeing hitting Madagascar, or the worsening water crisis in South Africa with some dams operating at 1% capacity, or a 2.3 reduction in rainfall in Zambia, or shorter rainy season in East Africa, or extreme heat waves in North Africa, or the decreased precipitation in Central Africa, or the flooding in West Africa, as we see in Nigeria, where cities like Lagos that are already less than 2 meters above sea level are exposed to torrential rains and sea level rise. The die is cast. This risk funnel out to manifest in the region's economy, where a GDP drop of up to 15% that was originally predicted to happen by 2030 as a result of climate change will move much closer to the present. And with this, the escalation of socioeconomic misery that is already at breaking point is guaranteed, be it the 257 million citizens who go to bed hungry in the African continent, or the 12 million young people who need jobs every year amidst shrinking economies that remain disenfranchised in unemployment, or the up to 60 million children that are malnourished and costing the continent up to 16% of the GDP, amongst many others. Despite all these, another variable, the COVID-19 global pandemic, has been added to this equation of stressors. These realities will be weighing heavily on the moral conscience of the entire global community as they convene at COP26 in just about 54 days from today, with a full agenda including securing global net zero emissions by 2050 and keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees, mobilizing finance, adapting to protect communities, natural habitats, and working together to deliver on these aspects will be key. The real test for all of us today is how we can then be able to take this climate action agenda and deliver it within the lens of accelerating socioeconomic transformation for the African continent. As we drive the green pandemic recovery as proposed in the United Nations Environment Programme Emissions Gap Report 2020, but how the youth can take leadership in the implementation ambition is our own fierce urgency of now. The African youth are the biggest known state actors constituency. The youth, they are the powerhouse of Africa. And without them, Africa will never be able to drive a socio-economically viable just transition. Therefore, to drive ambitious implementation, you the youth, and those young at heart, as you listen in today, you will need to espouse some foundational attributes, like a lion. You will need to understand your own territory and act within it. By territory here, what I mean is the socio-economic context. In Africa, as we speak today, this means that ensuring implementation of climate action leverages on the economic locomotive of the continent, the informal sector that employs over 80% of people in the continent, and they face the biggest vulnerability challenge of climate change. Beyond understanding territory, ambitious implementation will need vision of an eagle, which can spot and focus on a target as far as 3 kilometers away. Such understanding of vision, what I call an eye for solutions, will be critical to ensure climate action becomes an accelerator of socio-economic development. As an example, Africa's primary source of emissions is land-based, accounting for about 56% of continental emissions. A visionary approach to cutting these emissions will be establishing climate action enterprises for waste recovery to domestic fuel briquette and biofertilizer, amongst other non-capital-intensive areas to tap market opportunities. In addition, you will need an attribute, what I call the discipline of an ox. The endurance, the persistence, and consistency displayed by an ox on a plow is the hallmark of discipline that underpins success in any venture. You will need this discipline to drive the implementation of climate action from a socio-economic lens. To crown it all, these attributes, you will need wisdom, which must guide all your actions. And these 4 attributes I've given you today needs to be exercised within the following principles. And the first is, as a continent, climate action must be leveraged as an investment opportunity. A climate change narrative must urgently graduate from projecting liability to projecting socio-economic and investment opportunities. Youth, who constitute up to 60% of the unemployed in Africa, will usher themselves to climate action if they see the economic opportunities it presents. The enabling policy pillars are largely already in place. As we're speaking today, over 98% of African countries have ratified the Paris Climate Change Agreement. In the NDCs that are ratified, 70% of these NDCs prioritize clean energy and agriculture as well as forestry. These are already opportunities. And in addition to this, we have climate smart agriculture, clean energy, feed-in tariffs, forestry policy, to name just a few. Every young person should leverage this freely available information and start implementing it from a socio-economic lens, leveraging their communities as a market. For example, through our work in the continent with young people, we see simple climate action solutions of solar dryers, solar fridges, decentralized to agro-value chain actors in communities, helping reverse post-harvest losses that are costing the continent up to 48 billion. That takes me to the second point, youth skills retooling. You cannot address any challenge while ignoring your own powerhouse. African youth are Africa's powerhouse, and how they can become drivers of enterprise opportunities through the climate lens is critical in increasing implementation ambition. Improving, refining, and adapting young people's skills to align with tapping socioeconomic opportunities is critical. Through an incubation approach, we develop called innovative volunteerism. We are structurally guiding young people. We're inspiring young people of different backgrounds to turn their passions into profits and retool their skills in developing and decentralizing simple climate action solutions that address on-demand areas among communities. Many of you here today are innovative volunteers. Through these, many of you are fabricating solar dryers. You are turning agricultural waste into fuel briquettes that are 2 times cheaper than charcoal to minimize the impact of indoor pollution that kills over 500,000 Africans each and every year. These young people who are availing themselves to seize opportunities are sharing their experiences. They are sharing their lessons online to influence more young people to take up innovative volunteerism as a tool to drive climate change. That takes me to the third point. We must leverage on policy incentives, especially physical incentives. Favorable policies, especially physical policies, play a significant role in shifting market behavior and especially investment from one area to another. A simple example to illustrate what I am saying here today, using Kenya as an example, where physical policy incentive exempting value-added tax on LPG led to a significant behavioral change in both consumers and producers in the market. In less than a decade, the number of liquid petroleum gas filling plants rose from 9 to 105 plants, while consumption almost doubled from 150 to 300 tons over 3 years. Accordingly, targeted physical incentives are critical, but youth must seize on them to bring impact to scale. For example, to minimize risk of charcoal and biomass, unlock opportunities. The latest step that Kenya, for example, has taken to incentivize clean cooking is through the Finance Act of 2021. This legislation exempts 3 classes of clean cooking from 16% VAT, including sustainable briquettes. What does this mean? It means those in Kenya can tap into this. Uganda have done a similar thing to take the VAT off liquid petroleum. The youth of Africa should leverage such incentives and devise their own climate action enterprises that tap into these incentives. Yes, that is not enough, but we must start with what we have, because it is only through that we can then be able to generate empirical data on the work that you do to further incentivize further policy incentives to be recalibrated, such as affordable financing for the young people who are engaged in developing climate action solutions needed by the informal sector, or tax holidays to young entrepreneurs who establish climate action solutions to enable them to minimize their tax burden during their formative years. And that takes me to the 4th point, which is non-policy incentives. Policy incentives, regardless of how timely they may be, will never accomplish that much if they fall on passionless citizens. The responsibility of devising competitive solutions that turn challenges into opportunities to actualize the intended impact of policies falls squarely on each and every one of us, and especially the biggest constituency in the continent, you the youth. This, however, calls for a right mindset, a mindset of discipline, a mindset of purposeful passion. This is irreplaceable in motivating an individual to action, and we owe ourselves, each and every one of us, regardless of where we are, the task of taking implementation of the personal responsibility. That takes me to the last point. We must become values-based leaders. In the mid-40s to the late 50s, and on to the early 60s, as the clamor for self-determined rule reached fever pitch in Africa, there arose self-appointed men and women who espouse boldness, who espouse unshakable unity. They espouse dedication and selflessness and fidelity to a struggle to liberate their people, a task which was their own unborrowed vision, a calling they had to execute. Their every move was governed by a laser-sharp focus and clarity of vision to win independence for their people. No amount of persecution, lack, threats could stand in their way. They did it not for themselves, but for the future generations they had no hope of ever meeting. They were joined ideologically in the struggle by timeless values of selflessness and character of discipline and humility. They did not postpone this call for a day in the hope for elusive perfection. This is the foundation of values-based leadership that we all must identify with and champion wherever we are to drive climate action in the continent. It is leadership premise of selflessness and taking personal responsibility to touch many lives with what we have. Today, Africa urgently needs climate action to drive socio-economic resilience. And among the most important constituency to tap is you, the youth. Because we know that in the cycles of life, it happens that a unique challenge befalls one generation, which must be solved to guarantee the next safe existence of future generations. Climate change is the challenge of our generation, and we have only 2 decades within which to change course and guarantee both present and future generations. Stand up and become a values-based leader to be counted. Thank you.
Dr. Richard, I am definitely inspired. You have talked on a lot of issues. I have been inspired, and I'm sure the rest of the participants here have been inspired. Thank you very much for this. And everyone here, you can always follow Dr. Richard on social media to just take up or continue the conversation from there, because this is conversation. These are conversations that we always need to continue to have, discussions that we need to always continue to have as far as issues concerning climate change is concerned. Thank you once again, Dr. Richard. This was really a very insightful deliberation from you.